My name is Emily Carter. And before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand who is standing in that kitchen. I am not a woman who falls apart easily. I grew up in Beaumont, Texas, not wealthy but stable. My mother was a school administrator. My father drove long haul for 17 years before his knees gave out. I watched both of them work with quiet dignity, and I internalized that. I earned a finance degree from UT Austin in 2013, graduated with a 3.8, and spent the next 9 years building a career as a senior financial analyst at an energy services firm in Houston. By the time I turned 32, I was earning $94,000 a year, managing a portfolio reconciliation team of 6 people, and had been passed over for one promotion I deserved and given another one I earned twice over. I say all of that not to impress you. I say it so you understand the specific cruelty of what Daniel did, not just on that birthday morning, but for the 7 years before it. Because here is what else was true about me on that Saturday, in March. I had not taken a solo vacation in 4 years. I had not had a full weekend to myself in longer than I could remember. I had quietly absorbed Daniel's business losses, twice, without a single public complaint, restructuring our household budget both times so that his pride could stay intact. I had shown up to his family dinners smiling when his mother called me, the serious one, in a tone that was never a compliment. I had shrunk, slowly, methodically, the way you don't notice yourself doing it until one day you're standing in your own kitchen in your socks and a man is smiling at the wreckage of something you made with your own hands. I had been patient for 7 years. That morning, my patience had an expiration date. And I was the only one in that kitchen who knew it. Did I want to be fair? Because I think fairness matters, even when you're talking about someone who stopped deserving it. Daniel Carter was charming when I met him. Genuinely. He had this easy confidence, the kind that fills a room without demanding it. We met at a friend's housewarming in 2015 in Midtown Houston. He was funny. He remembered small things. On our third date, he showed up with a specific brand of sparkling water I had mentioned offhandedly, and I thought, this one pays attention. What I didn't understand then was that there are 2 kinds of men who pay close attention to you. The ones who want to love you well, and the ones who are cataloging your weaknesses. By year 2 of our marriage, the pattern had already started. I just didn't have the language for it yet. The first time I clearly saw it was in 2020. I had just been promoted to senior analyst, a title I had worked toward for 3 years. I came home with a bottle of Veuve Clicquot and told Daniel over dinner. He nodded, refilled his glass, and said, "That's great, Em. Does it come with actual money, or just a new email signature?" His cousin was at the table. He laughed. I smiled, and I absorbed it. I told myself he was joking. I told myself he was proud, just uncomfortable expressing it. I told myself a lot of things in those years that I no longer believe. The second time was cleaner, uglier. In the spring of 2022, Daniel's consulting business hit a wall. A client contract fell through, and he lost roughly $38,000 in projected revenue over 6 months. I restructured our household finances quietly, moved $14,000 from my personal savings to cover the mortgage gap, and never once brought it up at dinner. He knew. We both knew. He never said thank you, and I never asked for it. What he did instead was begin introducing me at social events as my wife. She works in finance, with this particular pause before the word works, like it was mildly embarrassing. Like I was a woman with a hobby, not the person keeping our household solvent. I noticed. I said nothing. The third example is the one I think about most because it was the most deliberate. In late 2022, I was approached by a former colleague about a partnership opportunity, a small financial consulting firm she was co-founding. She wanted me as a third partner. The buy-in was $22,000. The projected return on a 3-year horizon was significant. I had done the analysis myself. It was sound. I brought it to Daniel, not for permission but as a courtesy, the way people in honest partnerships do. He talked me out of it over 4 dinners. Not loudly. Quietly. It's risky. She's not proven. What if it tanks and you've damaged your reputation? I just don't want to see you get hurt, Em. I walked away from the deal. That firm, 18 months later, was acquired for $2.3 million. My share would have been roughly $340,000. I found that out on a Tuesday morning in January. Daniel was downstairs watching television. I sat with that number for a long time. $340,000. I thought about what that felt like. And then I filed it. Not emotionally. Literally. I opened a folder on my laptop that I had labeled simply R, and I added that figure to a running document I had been quietly building for longer than he knew. That folder was about to become the most important thing in my life. I need to take you back to that kitchen.
Because I skipped something.
When Daniel dropped that cake on the floor, we were not alone in the house. My best friend Priya was upstairs in the guest room. She had driven in from Austin the night before, 3.5 hours, specifically to celebrate my birthday. She had texted me at 11 p.m. the night before with a voice note that said, "I cannot wait to hug you tomorrow. M. 32 is going to be your year." She heard everything. I know she heard it because 20 seconds after the cake hit the floor, I heard the guest room door go completely silent overhead. The kind of silence that means someone has stopped moving and is holding their breath. Daniel didn't know she was there. He had forgotten.
Or he didn't care.
I'm not sure which one is worse. He was still smiling when he said it the second time. Softer, almost conversational. "Clean it up before your little party. I don't want to come home to this mess." Then he picked up his keys from the counter, his coffee thermos, and walked out through the garage door like he had just reminded me to take out the recycling. The garage door closed. I stood there for 11 seconds. I counted. Then Priya appeared at the bottom of the stairs. She was still in her pajamas, hair undone, and she looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not pity, something harder than pity, and she said, very quietly, "Emily, how long has this been happening?" And I opened my mouth to say, "It's not that bad," the sentence I had said to myself 100 times, and I couldn't finish it. I sat down on the kitchen floor, right next to the ruined cake, and I cried for approximately 4 minutes. I know it was 4 minutes because the coffee maker clicked off at 9:19, and I checked my phone at 9:23. Then I stopped. I wiped my face with a dish towel. I stood up. I looked at Priya and said, "I need you to take some photos of this before I clean it up." She didn't ask why. She picked up her phone. 12 photographs. Date and time stamped. 9:24 a.m., March 11th. The cake on the white tile. The ganache splatter. The buttercream rosettes crushed. The kitchen island where it had been sitting. The empty space. Then I opened my contacts, scrolled to a name I had quietly saved 8 weeks earlier after a conversation I never told Daniel about, and I pressed call. The phone rang twice. "Good morning, this is Sandra Okafor." "Sandra," I said, "it's Emily Carter. I think I'm ready to move forward." There was a brief pause on the line, the professional kind, and then she said, "Okay, Emily, let's talk." I walked into the backyard, so Priya couldn't hear me. The March air was cold and damp, and I was still in my socks, and I did not care even slightly. That was the moment everything shifted. The party never happened. I canceled it at 10:15 a.m. with a single group text, "Not feeling well, so sorry, we'll reschedule soon." Daniel came home at 6:47 p.m. to a clean kitchen and a wife reading quietly on the couch. He never asked about the cake. I never mentioned it either. But Sandra Okafor, family law attorney, had my first consultation appointment confirmed for the following Tuesday at 2 p.m. And I had already started printing documents. Here is what Daniel never understood about me. I am a financial analyst. Professionally. For 9 years. I spend my working hours finding the exact place where numbers tell a different story than the one being presented. I am trained, specifically deliberately trained, to notice what other people overlook. He had lived with that skill set for 7 years and never once considered what it meant. Let me tell you what I had. The first asset was the property. My grandmother, Ruth Elaine Thibodeau, passed away in November 2019. She left me her home in Beaumont, a 3-bedroom, 1.5-bath property on Magnolia Street that she had owned outright since 1987. No mortgage, no liens, valued at approximately $187,000 at the time of her death. I inherited it in my name only. It was never added to the marital estate.
Daniel knew it existed.
He had been to the property once, for Nana Ruth's repast. He referred to it casually, occasionally, as that house in Beaumont, the way you refer to something you've already mentally dismissed. What he did not know, because he had never once asked to see the paperwork, was that I had been quietly maintaining that property for 3 years. New roof in 2021. HVAC serviced annually. It was currently rented to a schoolteacher named Marcus for $1,100 a month. That income had been depositing into a personal account Daniel did not have access to, did not know the balance of, and had never inquired about. $1,100 a month. For 31 months. That was $34,100 sitting quietly in an account with only my name on it. The second asset was the documentation. For the previous 14 months, every time Daniel transferred money out of our joint operating account for his business expenses, vendor payments, software subscriptions, a $4,200 charge to what I eventually traced to a luxury car detailing membership, I had been logging it. Transaction date, amount, listed payee, and a notes column where I documented whether the expense had any corresponding business record. A significant portion did not. The third and most critical piece was something Sandra identified within 40 minutes of reviewing what I brought to her office on that Tuesday. Daniel had, on 2 separate occasions in 2021 and 2023, signed documents related to refinancing conversations we had never completed, documents that had been initiated under both our names, then quietly withdrawn. Sandra looked up from the folder, removed her glasses, and said, "Emily, he attempted to access equity on the Beaumont property.
Twice.
Using your name." She set the papers down carefully. "That," she said, "is a problem for him." What they didn't know was, I had already found the second filing 3 weeks before my birthday. I had been waiting for the right moment ever since that. I want to be very clear about something. I did not want revenge. Not in the cinematic sense. I did not want to humiliate Daniel publicly or destroy his life or make him feel the way the floor of my kitchen made me feel that Saturday morning. What I wanted was accurate. I wanted out. I wanted what was mine. And I wanted to leave in a position of strength rather than desperation. Those are not the same thing as revenge, even when they produce similar results. Sandra laid it out for me in our second meeting, which was April 3rd, a Thursday, in her office on Westheimer Road. She had a yellow legal pad, a blue pen, and a calm that I found genuinely steadying. "Here's what you have," she said. "A separate property asset with documented rental income. A pattern of unauthorized financial transfers from joint accounts. 2 documented attempts to leverage marital credit against your sole ownership property without your consent. And 14 months of transaction records showing a pattern of personal expenditure misrepresented as business costs." She tapped the legal pad. "What you do not yet have is the final piece. You need him to make one more move. One clean, documentable, unambiguous move that establishes intent." I asked her what she meant. She said, "I mean, don't file yet. Watch. And let him be who he is." I went home that evening, and I was the perfect wife for 63 days. I cooked. I attended his family's Easter gathering and smiled at his mother. I did not change any account passwords. I did not move any funds. I did not retain a single facial expression that communicated anything other than a woman going quietly about her life. What I did do, quietly, carefully, at my work laptop during lunch breaks and on Saturday mornings when Daniel was at the gym, was build the case. I printed and scanned 37 months of joint account statements. I created a categorized spreadsheet, the kind I build professionally, logging every transaction above $200 that could not be verified against a legitimate business receipt. The total across that period came to $41,380. I also hired, on Sandra's recommendation, a licensed forensic accountant named Dr. Patricia Wynn to review the 2 Beaumont property filings. Her preliminary report, delivered May 14th, used the phrase, unauthorized use of co-owner identity, twice. That phrase has legal weight. Sandra underlined it both times. Then, on May 22nd, Daniel gave me exactly what Sandra had predicted he would. He came home at 7 p.m. on a Wednesday and told me, with the particular casualness of a man who had rehearsed his tone, that he needed me to sign some refinancing paperwork. He said it was related to consolidating some business liabilities. He set a manila folder on the kitchen counter and said, "Just need a couple signatures. It's straightforward." I looked at the folder. I did not open it. I said, "Of course. Let me just look it over this weekend when I have time to read everything properly." He said, "It's not complicated. It'll take 2 minutes." I smiled. "I know. I just like to read things fully before I sign. You know how I am." He knew how I was. He had simply forgotten to be concerned about it. I photographed every page of that folder at 11:43 p.m. that night while he was asleep. Emailed the images to Sandra at 11:51 p.m. She responded the following morning at 7:08 a.m. with 4 words. "This is it. File Monday." The folder contained a third attempt to refinance the Beaumont property, this time for $95,000 in equity withdrawal, with a signature line pre-populated with my name, attached to a lending agreement that listed Daniel's business as the primary beneficiary. He had not told me about the loan. He had not told me about the lender. He had simply assumed I would sign because I had always eventually signed. On Friday, May 23rd, I called Marcus, my tenant in Beaumont, and gave him a heads up that the property ownership would be going through a legal clarification process and his lease was fully protected. He thanked me. I thanked him. On Saturday, May 24th, I had brunch with Priya. We ordered eggs Benedict and fresh orange juice and sat by the window and talked about everything except Daniel for 2 full hours. On Monday, May 26th, Sandra Okafor filed. I was at my desk at work when it happened. I was reviewing a quarterly reconciliation report. My phone buzzed once, Sandra's name, and the text said simply, "Filed. Served by 2 p.m. I set my phone face down on my desk. I finished the reconciliation report, and I did not feel anything dramatic. No fireworks, no shaking hands, just the clean, settling sensation of a decision fully made. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't, because Daniel, being exactly who he had always been, decided to fight. Daniel's attorney called Sandra on a Wednesday morning in June and used the word aggressive. He said my filing was aggressive. He said my documentation was aggressive. He said my timeline was aggressive. Sandra called me afterward and relayed this with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who has heard that word applied to prepared female clients approximately 400 times in her career. She said, "Emily, when they call you aggressive, it means they weren't ready." Daniel was not ready. He had spent 7 years living with a financial analyst who paid close attention to everything, and he had somehow convinced himself that attention was directed everywhere except at him. That is the particular blindness of a certain kind of man, the one who mistakes patience for passivity and quietness for ignorance. He hired an attorney named Brett Hollis, who had an office in Sugar Land and a reputation for drawn-out negotiations. I know this because I looked him up the same afternoon Sandra told me his name. I read 3 years of his case outcomes. I sent Sandra a 2-paragraph summary of what I found. She replied, "Already knew. We're fine." The discovery process began in late June. This is the phase where both parties are legally required to disclose financial records, assets, liabilities, and relevant documentation. Daniel's team submitted what I can only describe as a performance, a carefully curated selection of records that painted him as a modestly struggling small business owner with limited liquid assets and reasonable expenses. Dr. Patricia Wynn's forensic report submitted 3 days later told a different story. The $41,380 in unverified personal expenditures from our joint account. The luxury car detailing membership, $4,200 annually, listed under vehicle maintenance, business use. A recurring $780 monthly charge to a restaurant and bar tab in Midtown that appeared 12 times across 14 months under client entertainment, with no corresponding client invoices, no business contracts, no verifiable meetings. And then the Beaumont filings. All 3 of them. Laid out in sequence, with dates, with signature lines bearing my name, with Dr. Wynn's written conclusion that the third attempt, the $95,000 equity withdrawal, constituted an attempt to leverage sole ownership marital property without informed spousal consent. Brett Hollis went quiet for 11 days after that submission. On day 12, he requested a settlement conference. We met in Sandra's conference room on a Tuesday in late July. Daniel sat across the table from me for the first time since I had filed. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, he was the same height, same build, but there was something compressed about him. The easy confidence had somewhere to be. He did not look at me directly for the first 40 minutes. His attorney opened with a number. Sandra wrote a counter number on her legal pad, turned it to face them, and said nothing. There was a long silence. Then the real negotiation began. By 4:15 p.m. that afternoon, we had the framework of an agreement. I will not disclose every detail. Sandra advised against it, and I think that is wise. But I will tell you what mattered. The Beaumont property remained entirely mine. No equity claim, no offset, no negotiation. Sandra had it removed from discussion in the first 20 minutes. The $41,380 in unverified joint account withdrawals was classified as dissipation of marital assets. In Texas, that carries specific legal consequences in property division. Daniel's share of our remaining joint assets was reduced accordingly. The forensic accounting fees, Dr. Wynn's invoice totaled $3,800, were assigned to Daniel as a litigation cost. And the attempted unauthorized refinancing of Nana Ruth's property? That matter was referred separately. I will only say that the lender involved was notified, Daniel's relationship with that lending institution was formally reviewed, and Brett Hollis strongly advised his client not to pursue that particular avenue further. In total, what I walked away with was financially significant, legally clean, and entirely documented. But the number that stayed with me, the one I sat with quietly on the drive home from Sandra's office that July evening, was not a dollar figure. It was this. I had spent 7 years making myself smaller so that Daniel could feel larger. I had walked away from a $340,000 partnership. I had absorbed $14,000 of his losses without acknowledgement. I had smiled at his mother's backhanded remarks and declined solo vacations and shrunk my ambitions to fit the shape of his comfort. And none of it, not 1 year, not $1, not one smile, had made him treat me with more care. That is not a lesson about Daniel. That is a lesson about what happens when you make someone's comfort more important than your own truth. The divorce was finalized on September 8th, a Monday. I was at my desk at work when Sandra texted. Same as when she filed. This time the text said, "Done. Congratulations, Emily Carter." I read it twice. I set my phone down. I looked out the window at the Houston skyline for a long moment, that flat, wide, relentlessly bright Texas sky, and I felt something I had not felt in so long I had almost forgotten its texture.
Space.
Just space. Inside my own chest. Room to breathe without calculating the cost of it. That evening I drove to Beaumont. I let myself into Nana Ruth's house, my house, with the key I had carried on my keychain for 6 years. I sat in her kitchen, at her old Formica table, in the quiet that only old houses have, and I ate takeout by myself and listened to nothing. It was the best birthday I never had. Daniel's actual birthday was October 14th. I know because I used to plan it every year. Reservations, gifts, the specific brand of bourbon he preferred. This year, I was in Tulum with Priya. We had booked it in August, 11 days, beachfront, completely offline. I did not send a card. If you've listened to this story all the way through, I want to say something to you directly. Not about Daniel. Not about divorce. Not about revenge. About the folder on your laptop that you haven't opened yet. About the phone call you've been rehearsing in your head for months. About the moment you sat on your own floor in your own house and talked yourself out of what you already knew. I spent 7 years telling myself that patience was virtue, that stability was worth the silence, that I was being mature by absorbing what should never have been mine to carry. I was not being mature. I was being afraid. The difference between those two things changed my life. I am not going to tell you what to do with your situation. You already know. You knew before you clicked on this video. What I will tell you is this. The version of you that stops shrinking is not a future version. She's already there. She's just waiting for you to stop apologizing for taking up space. If this story resonated with you, tell me where you're listening from. And if you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better, I hope you remember that was never the truth about you. If you're new here, welcome. This channel is built for stories exactly like this one. Real, specific, human, and hard-won. Subscribe if you want more. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And leave me a comment. I read every single one. I'll see you in the next story.